DerWelkrieg, some more typos. During December 1914 and January 15, France receives 2 of their replacements every turn. Now, start of January 15, what? Until the end of June of 16, they get, okay, well, this is both January. I'm just going to I'm not going to retract the units that I had. They were necessary to stop the Germans. But odd and even turns, they get 1 each. I'm going to assume that's going to be 2 per. And it's just the trickle down there. Well, as we slither into February here, the Germans have halted their assault, pulled back troops to a lot of these centers. They've got a lot of replacement points on the board. And my guess is the reason there's so few German replacement points is to limit them from stockpiling them, make them pull units out and use them. If you run out, if you lose them, you use them. Or if you don't use them, you lose them, essentially. So the French are allowed to stockpile their replacements without really throwing them into the line quickly without losing anything in huge quantities. I'm not sure why they need as many as they have. But anyway, the Germans definitely have a tight situation, as I showed. They had run out and only make it to here in terms of the track, so I can't even put what I'm planning out there. But I've got a significant number of points on the board most of last turns, just because I couldn't afford to pull my units off the line. Well, now I can. I'm on the defensive. The only thing I did, and they'll be recuperating next turn, and then they'll be able to move back into the line, and by then I'll have more points and be able to throw more in, etc. Cycling units in and out. The only thing they did was this big assault here, 7 supply points. They only did, they were at like +3 or something. They only did 6 or 7 hits on this, but I have no 30-point marker, so they're down, nor a way to get there easily. So I'm down to a 27. So the French took 9 morale loss. Anyway, that's where we are. And looking over the situation, I saw no opportunities for an Allied attack. So they're also just strengthening their line. I've got to assign the points to the French. They're getting 40 points of replacement points, or of supply points. I also wanted to highlight one of my accoutrements to gaming is a shaving brush. Of course, I still use it to shave as well when I bother to do that. But these glossy maps, and especially when the morning light hits them, you can just see the dust all over them. It's horrible. And every now and then I'll go through and I'll dust some of the areas of the map that aren't covered with counters. Just sort of an OCD type thing, but over here it's fine. But in the map itself, there's just this massive dirt, and it really gets to me somehow. Germans continue rebuilding their units. They're all up to strength now. Now they can move them back in the line next turn. And they did another siege on this, artillery fire on this. Another 7 supply gone. But they took out 7 more strength points with it. It's vital for them to wipe this out. Now, once quickly, because once the French can get troops into there, and they have had trouble moving them quickly enough, once they can get troops into there, it becomes a more painful process to destroy the fortification. But they probably still have a slight advantage to continuing. They don't want to, say, let the French have this spur point. So if they can actually blow it away badly enough that the French don't want to be there anymore and pull back to just these 2 hexes, well, it cleans up and tightens up their lines a little bit. Now, if they could get this hex and this hex, but that's not going to happen, then they'd have the rail link that they want to get into this little southern salient. That's really what stopped them, was the lack of rail to a large extent. They couldn't maintain their headquarters where they were easily enough. Okay, I finished up the French Allied side of the second turn in February. And now I'm really seeing something I like about this game as we move into this trench warfare period, is nothing's happening. I mean, absolutely nothing. I like games where nothing happens. It's not that absolutely. So when I say absolutely nothing, I'm being a little facetious there. What's actually kind of going on is trying to figure out, okay, where's the offensive going to go? And the obvious place is here when the French hit. This is where they want to start the battle. They have 3 units on the line. It's in an area where I think I can kind of crush in and perhaps make attacks from multiple directions. Everything's going to be entrenched at that point. So now it becomes I've got to devote my forces into that salient. And obviously, if the Germans just defend this tremendously, I can launch it on a 2-hex front somewhere else. So the Germans can't, overcompensate when they see my troops hit a certain salient. They could, of course, move more of their forces into that salient, but perhaps I can shift. Now, here's the problem for the French is they kind of telegraph their move anytime they go, because the Germans can rail stuff, drop it into the line and attack right away. The French can't do that. So wherever an Allied offensive is going to be, it's going to be pretty obvious that it's happening, I don't remember what the British ability is. They may be the wild card in this. I know that their rail ability is not as good as the Germans, but I don't remember on which side it is. Yeah, the British can do the same thing. They can't entrain in a zone of control, but they can detrain and then move into a zone of control, which means they have not quite the same capacity. They can build up a reserve that can be used to strike in an area, and they can shift one of their headquarters, etc. So that becomes my potential strike force, is to throw a British force along the line a little better. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious where the sector that the attack is building up is going to be. And I'm building up the French here because this, I think, is the weakest German position. The terrain's not good, unlike over here. If I start building up here, this would be great to attack, but it's not going to shock anyone. But I might be able to build a little local, power in there or something. Anyway, I've been babbling too much. Just basically throwing some units into the line and preparing enough force. We'll see when it happens. It's going to take several months because right now, I'm at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, under 60 points, I would say. A couple more months, though, and I'm going to be coming near that edge, and I'm going to have to launch the assault. Well, the very quiet month of February continues, and actually I'm done with it at this point. Move the German artillery up around Lille, take that out, get the additional points there. I actually should be a lot more points, but I've already scored, I think, the hex sides. So all I'm going to be getting is the 10 or 15 points for that, plus whatever I destroy in the fortification itself, which should be pretty easy with it being surrounded like this, even with the halved strength. Yeah, halved and doubled, essentially, because of the city center there. Gave up on Paris. It just doesn't look like it's going to happen, and why expend ammo on that? Still positioned here, might do this. Neither one's happening right now because I don't have the points in my in my headquarters to do it yet. But really, both sides have been swapping troops in and out, filling out their strength points, and that's really about it. I think I've got something to do with the English there. Got a while where I got to load up the new month, March, on the track, and I guess that's not a winter month, so I don't think we're going to see an offensive in March either. The French want to build up enough points because, all the trench lines are going to be in place now. So there's no great advantage to doing so. And overall, the French are going to gain more than the Germans, I think. Well, see, the Germans are gaining a lot over March. The world changes a little bit in April, though. That's one of the issues. April 1915, when trench lines collapse, they become these damaged markers. And they can also only be built adjacent to the enemy, and the ones that aren't adjacent to the enemy will be stripped away. So I've got some places where there's some German defenses in the background, just because that's where the headquarters are, and they just, they're digging in for the hell of it, basically. There's no harm in doing so. So maybe we have a reason to do an offensive, but I just don't think I have enough French troops. I don't feel like I have enough now, and I don't think I'm going to have enough here. Maybe in April I will, but the world does get more difficult come April. All right, I'll probably be loading this one up. It's a short one, but we'll see. Yeah, to make sure to have everything in focus when I reload something. Anyway, here we are at the beginning of March. Did the German turn again, still kind of loading up, trying to support things, but I threw a headquarters, some supplies up here, spent 8 supplies on this big attack. There was a chance. I needed 4 higher. I got a 3 of taking Lille this turn, but it's down to 1 strength point that I can wipe out almost guaranteed. It will not take a lot of strength, a lot of firepower points. The problem is it'll take some, because I need the ringed effect here. So that's 6, say, I don't know, say 12 or whatever. Well, 6 will get me +3, which should work, because I'm not going to get the doubling effect because of the city center and the multiples. Anyway, that's what the Germans did. New supplies in. You can see their defensive supplies are a little healthier. They could be run out here. I really wanted to take Lille, and I may at some point want to take Antwerp as well, but that's an expensive thing to take. And honestly, I'm not sure why. Given that I've decided the Belgians are locked in and have accepted some sort of armistice, I don't know if attacking them does me any good. I don't gain anything from taking it. Obviously, in the full campaign, there's probably some productive capabilities up here that you'd be adding. There's a factory, manpower center, but I doubt that matters on the wrong side. But mainly, I'm just waiting for the Allied offensive at this point. Spend a couple more supply to finish this off, add more demoralization points to the French. I just want to get it taken care of and get my artillery on the line where I can start using them if need be, get them in position so maybe they can support an assault of some sort. Okay, so we came to the first of these things that are indicated as units built out of other units. Now, all that happens is for every 2 full strength points, I have to remove a strength point from somewhere for it. So I've got to find 2 points I'm willing to discard. And if I can, I'll probably toss it off something that's already on the line or already in the replacement field. I don't think there's an option. I think I have to do this. I can't bring this unit in 2 strength points less or whatever. But okay. All right, well, March went into April. Yeah, I know, passed by really quick. But we're just talking people pulling troops off the line, restoring them, putting them back in. One thing, the number of German replacement units caused a problem. I'm pretty sure I cheated. I'm pretty sure that somewhere towards the end of the month, I probably threw 1 extra replacement unit in. But it could have been more. However many weren't there in March, however many turns didn't have little markers, well, I just put that odd even factor back in. That stopped in January, I guess. France is on it, Germany's not. And, well, shit happens. And I'm not going to try to penalize the Germans for that. I know they're doing quite well. They're going to have a lot of withdrawals this month. They have a huge amount of forces being pulled out and not a lot coming on the board. As well, I think sometime during this month, the French pretty much have to launch their offensive. And probably not too late in the month, because they've got to spend enough supply that the supplies they get next month won't throw them over the burden. Right now, what are we at here? 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 72, 82. Sounds like 106. They're going to be at 146 as soon as they get their supplies this month. That means they're 4 points away from losing the game. So they must launch their offensive this month. And it has to be a pretty, they have to expend a significant amount of that. They're at least at 40 points or so in this month, which I'm thinking is 2 or 3 turns probably. I kind of want to wait that long because all the trenches are built. The Germans are going to have units being pulled off the line. I'm still not convinced where I want to do it. I like the idea of a hinge offensive to throw the Brits in there too. They have a lot of force power. But as I started building up there, the Germans started building up there. Over here, things look kind of weak, but the Germans were building up there. Up here looks weak right now. Who knows what will happen, though. The Germans have to withdraw from places. So I kind of want to maintain a lot of strength. Over here is kind of interesting, too. The Germans have had to denude their line over there a little bit. But it's hard to tell. And I want it to be one big offensive. And the reason not to do the Brits is the Brits have not a lot of supply. They have 24 right now. They'll be getting 10 more. They're not really in position. I got to deal with that. They're not really in position to launch that big attack. Anyway, we'll probably do this month in half this video, and maybe once the assault starts, another half. Whatever works out. 3 turns into April. And by the way, all the trenches have kind of, all the back end trenches are gone. Anything that I had kind of kicking around where there were troops, if I was wrong about that, if this one, say, was here, it would disappear. And from now on, trenches can only be built at the front line. And when they're destroyed, either through combat or if you leave them and you're at the front line, they become these devastation markers, which don't provide any defensive benefit, but they do hinder movement. Just to show that kind of no man's land that can occur. What this means is kind of interesting. This and this hex are no longer entrenched. The French kind of got the worst of the deal out of that because, well, they have a fortress which provides some of the same benefits, but the Germans have the river line, which gives them significant defensive benefits there, which is why they're not right up here. It's hard to tell. Nobody wanted to go in that hex, and it just didn't happen. Everywhere else, we're up against the line, so it's okay there. I don't know if I mentioned, but Lille went, and I don't think I paid the demoralization points for that. I got to do that. But we're just waiting for the offensive to start, and the French looked and said, I had a good opportunity. There were some weak German units on the line as some things were getting swapped out, and they said, this is a good time. But then they looked at what they had on that area, and they just didn't have the right troops for it. So they're now building up this front. They had been planning the attack over here, and it's actually pretty solid, but I decided that using the English supply was a bad idea. So now I'm kind of shifting my intention over to here and moving some troops in that direction. Haven't moved supplies yet. I ought to do that the turn before I actually launch the attack, because I'll probably strip more troops and build a reserve behind where I'm making the assault. That'll weaken some other front, but that's okay for now. Speaking of forgotten demoralization points, I forgot about the DM penalty for Germany. I didn't remember if it started in 15 or 16. I thought 16 for the blockade. 65 points a month. And that's 260 I owe there. So maybe it's a good time to take a look at what we're at. For the Germans here, we're of course at 580. That's a hefty expense they're going to be paying for the rest of the game. Just every month, 65 points. And they're Their limit is 4,500, where they start suffering. Oh no, sorry, 3,000, where they start suffering issues. The French start suffering at only 1,500, and they're already at 786. And the English, well, they're doing pretty well still. They get a hit at 1,200, and they're under 200 right now, 130 something. All right. So the French massed everything they could up against this hex. I don't remember, 60 something strength points. Defensively, 45 coming back. You know, this is what they're going to face. This is one of the best places that they could hit. Clear terrain, because the river doesn't hurt them, because they've got a crossing there. A trench line, but they've got that everywhere at -2. I mean, if they could have massed something here without the Germans noticing, they could get better odds. But they don't budget. And they spent, I think, 12 supply points on this attack, the extra one because they got the artillery in there. It's just not doing the job. They're going to have to push more artillery, more men, maybe try to widen the attack. But with 3 units attacking here, it's hard to find another spot where they can get 3 units. So here they could get 3 units hitting. They could, of course, shift around on the front a little bit for their attack. But if they're spending 11 points a turn, they're going to meet their requirements. And each side took 6 losses. So, you know, attrition-wise, they can deal with that. They can deal with not gaining ground. There's no real great advantage to gaining ground, to tell you the truth. But the breakthrough, being able to leverage other attacks, forcing the Germans back, all this would have been a plus, but it's not why they're actually fighting. They're actually fighting to get rid of their supplies, because Germany will lose no matter what due to the 65 per turn, as long as Allied losses due to their offensives don't get too high. Germany will crack just by the way the game is designed. So doing this on a limited attritional scale is perfectly fine for me, for the Allies. As we're winding towards the end of April, this was the end of the 6th turn, French realized they weren't burning through points quickly enough with the single attack. They were pushing some artillery in. They attempted a second attack here. That went very, very badly. Overall, they lost the attrition fight here 7-9. This one, they lost something like 17-4 or something. I'm not quite sure why it worked out so badly. They're terrible rolls, but there's also some woods there, which ended up a total of -4 and a +2 on the German roll. Just ended up much worse than normal trenches. But with so many hexes around it, I thought I could get a lot more power against it. It didn't turn out very well, and I was already kind of set up. That was really the second attack that made sense. Trying to cross the river line here would have been really ugly. Opening up a front somewhere else didn't look very promising either. The Germans have kind of filled in the area around Paris a little stronger than it had been. Here at the end of April, French launched another big attack here along the river, the Seine. This one worked a lot better. They did, I think 13 hits to 7, nearly a 2-to-1 in terms of demoralization casualties. So remember, as soon as the month passes, 65 more points for the Germans. So the French can take some additional hits, but the Germans actually have a larger leeway there. But this was definitely a worthwhile turn. Got my supplies down low enough that I can take the next turn's supplies. I may be able to drain myself low enough that I can kind of call the offensive off at the end of this, figuring, well, maybe doing a later offensive in the year. And this one doesn't seem to be gaining any ground for whatever that may be worth, but it is definitely grinding both sides down. And the Germans can less afford to take care of that. They've got a bunch of units off the line right now that they're trying to recuperate or getting into shape. Those could be on the line, but the problem is with the German reinforcement or replacement rate, the way they're counters, they can't save them up or anything. They kind of have to do something. Now, they've got enough damaged units that they don't have to pull things off the line anymore. They probably are being a little risky here, but to some extent they're saying, you know, it doesn't matter. You can't hurt us. This was about the worst result they could possibly get. A very high roll for the French, but they did a high roll as well. It's just there were so many strength points of friendship. But supply costs, in a sense, you're doing those to be able to say, yeah, I can't attack. In a lot of ways, that's one of the problems I have with this game is it may very, very accurately model the effects of the attacks. It may enforce through the supply rolls a historical pace of attacks. But what it doesn't do in the least, and this is what La Grande Guerre does so well, even though it fails in some of, the implementations, is feel like it's really motivating my attacks properly. You got too much supply, you got to attack. Okay, granted, the armies did make the argument I can't attack because of that, but they wanted the supplies. They wanted to be able to attack, is the feeling you got. It wasn't that, oh yes, if not for the fact that I would get canned for fighting out a purely attritional war and just trying to starve Germany out, which the historical knowledge kind of says that's going to happen. Oops, I forgot some German units here. And these are from last turn. Let's rail them up somewhere into the area. I'll figure out what to do with them on my next German turn, but that's okay. With them up in Germany, I had to pay for those units to bring them back to life. That's part of the reason there's so many destroyed units. I had to pull troops out of regular units and make weaker units with them, etc. But yeah, it doesn't feel like my motivation is a reasonable one. As the French, I'm not trying to gain ground. I'm not trying to win battles because it will help my national will and hurt the German national will, which is really the motivation in La Grande Guerre. There were definite problems with the military implementation as compared to this in terms of how well it seems to model the actual fight. But when it comes down to it, my choice would actually lean more towards making decisions for the right reasons rather than having it play out correctly. Anyway, this is interesting and this is fun. It's just, it's not going to compete for me. All right, up it goes.
Cavalry units are highly mobile while having a low strength. Their movement allowance is higher because riding on horses is obviously faster than marching on foot. Their combat strength is significantly lower because they don't have much firepower. Cavalry units are very useful and important in the game. Using cavalry to your best advantage is a critical part of good play in the series of games, just as it was fundamental to generalship and strategy in World War I. You should never use cavalry to attack a defense of any significant strength. The cavalry would be annihilated, just as you would imagine would happen to riders on horses charging machine guns and quick-fire artillery. The advantages of cavalry are their high mobility and the fact that they project zones of control. Cavalry units should be used to prevent enemy forces from rapidly advancing by column movement, and also to protect the flanks of your forces, to keep the enemy from getting around the edge of your forces and threatening you with envelopment. On the other hand, you can use your cavalry if the opportunity presents itself to get around the enemy and assist in attempting to surround them. In the previous video, I showed an example of a cavalry unit using column movement to get around the enemy's flanks. You should use your own cavalry to prevent this. In the example, I showed the German cavalry division, this division right here, getting around the flank of the Russians. Let's look again at how they did this. The German cavalry, because it was not going to enter a Russian zone of control, could use column movement to get around the flank of the Russian forces, following the path seen here as the red line. And it ended up all the way up here in hex 2401. A single Russian cavalry unit, say in hex 2301, would have prevented this. Look at this situation again with such a Russian cavalry unit in 2301. The German cavalry unit in this case can get no further than 2102 because it cannot use column movement and enter an enemy zone of control. In fact, in this case, it cannot even move next to the Russian cavalry unit because it does not have enough movement points remaining while using regular movement to pay for entering a new hex containing an enemy zone of control. So along the same path, this is as far as it can now get. Cavalry units are also able to evade the enemy when approached or under threat from only enemy infantry forces. Should any amount of enemy infantry without cavalry declare its intention to attack a cavalry unit by either column attack or an attack during the combat phase, the defending cavalry unit has the option of retreating out of the hex it occupies. In this case, the attackers do not have to expend supply, and they may advance into the vacated hex as if combat had occurred. This is not an option should the enemy force threatening to attack contain any cavalry. Let's look at an example. Note that in this example, the Russians have the 3rd Cavalry Division in hex 2404. Let's say the German stack from 2205 moves to 2305 and declares its intention to column attack this Russian cavalry unit. At this point, before the Germans even expend supply, the Russian player could decide to withdraw the Russian division since it is only under the threat of attack from infantry forces. This is because the German cavalry division already in 2305 is not involved, as it did not start in the same hex as the stack and therefore cannot combine with the other units in their declared column attack. The Russian cavalry division would withdraw to 2504, since it must follow the same hex choice priorities as any retreating unit. The German forces could then advance from 2305 to 2404, just like they were advancing after combat. But in this case, since no actual attack occurred, the Germans would not have to expend any supply points. Let's say that in this example, it's the German combat phase. The German player declares that he is going to attack the Russian cavalry division in hex 2404 with all of the forces in hexes 2305 and 2405. In this situation, the Russian cavalry division could not withdraw before combat, as the Germans will be attacking with some cavalry, namely the cavalry division with the infantry stack in 2305. Note that in this case, because he is attacking with some cavalry, should the German take any losses, they will have to be taken by the cavalry unit first, as attacking cavalry strength points are the first ones lost in any counterattack. The fortress counter has an aerial view of a typical World War I fortress as its symbol. These were massive concrete structures with sloping outer walls protecting a central structure, usually mostly buried, with thick steel turrets containing artillery and machine guns. Forts were difficult positions to take, especially by infantry-heavy assaults. Fortress counters usually represent complexes of multiple forts. The forts were often constructed in a ring around a city or other important location. Each of the polygons you see here in this little diagram represent a fort in such a massive fortress complex. Obviously, fortresses do not move. They are placed on the map in the locations they were constructed. Note that their counters have no movement factors. Also, their strength value is inside parentheses. This means that their strength is only defensive in nature. Fortresses can only counterattack when they themselves are attacked. Since they represent fixed positions, fortresses do not have zones of control. Units in the same hex as a fortress still project their own zone of control, but a fortress by itself does not have one. Fortresses take strength point losses when attacked, just like other units. German fortresses and those of most other nationalities counterattack just like normal units that do not retreat. This means that their strength at the time of the counterattack is tripled. Russian fortresses were usually in disrepair, had obsolete equipment, and therefore are not tripled or even doubled when they counterattack. Fortresses do not expend supply points when counterattacking. They are using the ammunition stockpiled in their magazines. This also means that fortresses do not need supply lines. Fortresses significantly help other units defending in the same hex. Units are never required to retreat from a hex containing a fortress. If units in the same hex as a fortress are attacked and they choose to retreat, the fortress will lose strength first. If units do retreat from a hex containing a fortress, the 1/3 reduction only comes into play if the fortress is completely eliminated and the defender still needs to take additional losses. The 1/3 reduction for retreat is then only applied to the non-fortress strength that is lost. This is because there is no such thing as a retreat benefit for fortresses. Most fortresses can hold out quite a while if surrounded, but surrounded Russian fortresses, like the one you see here, will quickly have problems. They will lose 6 strength points every turn they are surrounded, without being attacked, due to their garrisons deserting their obsolete and ill-equipped posts. In fact, Russian fortresses reduced to less than 4 strength points for any reason are immediately eliminated. In the introductory game only, there are unassailable fortresses. You can see some here, such as in Hex 1918 or 2018. The unassailable fortress is this very thick outline of the hex. These are massive fortress complexes that could easily withstand anything an opposing player in the introductory game could throw against them. These hexes cannot be attacked. Note too that while defensively imposing, these unassailable fortresses do not have zones of control. Only units in them do.
And May opens up as March ended. Got a weird little blur here. With the French continuing to attack this one hex, I tried to look, can I shift it over? There's weakness over here. It would take too long to shift the attack across, and it would be telegraphed, and the Germans could slide over there. Just keep going at the same space. This is one of the best terrain pieces that I can attack. I've got clear terrain there. And with a damn good roll, I got a 6, and I think the defense got a 1, actually. I ended up doing 17 points of damage to 8, which is pretty damn good, but not quite enough to break it. Needed a little bit more. And the -2 of the trench definitely affected that. And like 107 points attacking it. This is one of the things that feels a little funny. It feels like the attacks cause too much damage even when they're not terribly successful. I'm not sure I really agree that the losses should be at the kind of levels we're seeing here. Of course, there's the variance of the table, but it feels a little funny to me, but it may be the necessary impetus to help motivate some of these attacks, along with the, hey, you got to spend it or lose it, but to motivate non-pure artillery barrages. All right, let me see what I can do about that little funny black spot. Punching into another turn here in the May offensive. French moved their main assault over to this hex. It wasn't this week. They did 17 hits to 12 for them. Again, you know, the advantage on the attack, grinding down the opposition. It's not like the Germans could afford to attack, though. It's just being able to mass the manpower against a hex, the additional manpower that allows you to do this. The German machine has mostly was worn down during the last during the big offensive. I don't think they're going to have to fight during 15. In fact, this is kind of like in La Grande Guerre, where if your opponent throws an offensive, you kind of don't have to. You get to spend as the supplies you need to. You take losses that make it impossible to make an offensive. It's going to be tougher. Plus, we have the withdrawals that have been constantly happening. The British also aided by launching an attack here. Now, this wasn't very effective. Both of these have a terrain modifier in addition to the trench, which just makes life worse on the attacker. But the British attack was mainly meant to try to strain the Germans a little bit more. It's just really a diversionary effort. They can't keep it up and keep pounding that. They also wanted to destroy some of their Canadian forces so that they can get their replacements into play. So they're going to be swapping those out. They do open up a little bit of weakness along their line. I don't think the Germans can afford to take advantage of it in counterattack. I'll have to think about that a little bit next turn, though. Germans are beginning to have losses mount, though. And they're going to have to start bringing new units back into play. They don't have to worry about the swapping in and out so much, though, now that they have piles up there. The French still have to kind of worry about it because they're trying to maintain an offensive, so they have to build full-strength units and then swap out the lesser strength units. But they can afford it. They're launching the offensive. They've got this huge excess of troops that you can see along the line there, just much bigger stacks. To get those stacks, they had to weaken themselves elsewhere, but the Germans can't really afford to defend against this and make an offensive somewhere else and keep things safe on the British front. So it's kind of a tricky situation for them. Pushed ahead through the 5th turn of May, and these really don't take very long. I'm just taking huge breaks in them. Played some, what is it, flying colors up here, which I was less impressed with than I had hoped. It was way too fiddly for the amount of ships involved in it. Anyway, continuous assaults on here. 2 more attacks there. The Brits staying out of it, mainly just the French funneling the troops. You see the big stacks in there. And the Germans pushing more and more in. The Germans are still losing slightly more than the French in terms of troop strength. That's not really important, except because it's not breaking the German army. It's not like where the French were, where they weren't able to hold their line. As long as this keeps holding, and I'm not losing more than the French are, and by significant amounts, I am losing more. It should be okay. The French supplies are beginning to wear out. They may have enough for 2 more attacks this turn. They may have to call the offensive off and come back in with a later offensive. Of course, that gives Germany time, a later one this year. That gives Germany time to recuperate and build up its forces too. So, you know, whatever stretching point they're putting the Germans to is kind of being thrown away if they take a break. But the problem is supply. You have to spend the supplies. Once you get to a certain point, the French have a very low limit at 150 compared to the amount of troops they have on the board and the amount of supplies they produce. They produce 40 a turn. And then they also have, this requirement. They have to get under that 100, stay under that 150. But they're not producing enough supplies and certainly not enough troops to just keep this offensive going forever. Well, supplies are really the problem here, but if we could keep going, the troops would become one very, very quickly. And those are harder to replenish. I'm only getting 4 of them a turn, which works out to be 28 a month. And I'm losing them in a pretty close to the same rate as I'm losing supplies. Well, after the 5th turn of the month, the French offensive's halted. They just don't see a point anymore. They're running their supply lines down. They're low enough. I don't remember what they're at. They're at 20, 30, 40, say under 50 points. They're going to get 40 more next month. They don't have to do anything. They're going to get 40 more the month after that. That puts them up to the 130 mark. So late May, June, July. Late in July, they may launch another offensive, maybe with more British support. At this point, they're rebuilding their forces. They get to rebuild at a faster rate than the Germans do because they're getting, in every 3 rounds, they get 12 strength points. The Germans, every 2 rounds, they get 12 strength points. The Germans get only 10. Okay, that doesn't sound like a big difference, but then you got the Brits also throwing in some significant points. Now, the Brits might end up having to launch an offensive. They had to launch one before because they're Australian forces. They need to use the replacement point that they have. And this is one of the problems that the Brits have to do is they get replacements and have nowhere to put them. And they don't have a tremendous amount of Australian replacement counters. So like the Germans, they have to cycle those through pretty quickly. They come in every other month, one of those counters with 4 strength points. So it's not a huge deal, but it does put a sort of a limit on them. And they do want to take advantage of those replacement points. There's no reason not to. They have the supply points to expend for it. And we might see an attempt to coordinate an assault at that point. But the French just don't see a point to continuing. They're not getting a good enough return on their investment. And if their supplies start to dip, that'll make them somewhat at risk against the Germans. There's no feeling in this game like of the historical situation, which was these fights just pressed on and on and on and kept drilling manpower until the countries basically break. That happens in La Grande Guerre. The motivations in that game force you into that. In this game, the motivations don't. The motivations to keep your supply total below a certain amount. That's the only motivation there is. Now you write back and say, well, the attack didn't work. I just don't feel like it captures the feeling correctly here. It may capture the damage, the effects very well. It feels like it does. But it doesn't feel like it gives you the reason to drive the actions that you would take. The relaxing of the French offensive opens up a weakness, and the Germans open fire here and destroy the fortifications down here. We're getting close to Verdun here. This is territory the Germans initially took historically took in their initial advance. But I've knocked this entrenchment down. It's now, there was a fortification there. It's sort of an exposed position and can help me kind of leverage my way through this river. It's just sort of a statement to the French. Okay, well, now you got to commit some troops there. You've got to actually defend that a little heavier. 6 strength points just went down, as well as 6 demoralization through an expenditure of artillery supply. The French don't know what the German supply situation is. It could be quite bad. That expenditure is kind of a, hey, fuck you, man, I can do this. I'm in much better shape than you think type of statement. Now, it could be a bluff. The French could decide to launch their attack thinking that the Germans have bluffed. Now, they really haven't. They still have a significant amount of supply here. The French want to recuperate. They're not going to. But it just shows you some of the gamesmanship that's in play here. They're going to instead reinforce this sector. In fact, if they don't reinforce that sector, and continue with their assault. They can continue with it and reinforce it. But if they choose to ignore this, there's a good chance the Germans will attack. They have a local superiority there that's fairly high. And continued rebuilding and withdrawals brings us to the end of May and into June. I found this one German unit that I had here, this 10-5 mountain. This is a mountain assault unit. Somewhere there has to be a mountain unit that equivalents with it. I don't know. I don't see an 8-5 mountain. So I'm just not sure. You know, maybe it was something that should have been withdrawn and wasn't, or whatever. It's just, I don't think that's the case. I looked pretty hard for the 8BR everywhere, I think. I don't know. They got these 7-5 mountain, with all the different strength points and so many different counters and them coming in and out this way. You know, it's just, it's a real headache, and however it works out, it works out. Anyway, moving into that June turn, we'll be getting 65 more demoralization points for the Germans and some new supplies. Not enough to force an attack, I think. The French feel like they have enough force to try to push it again, but they want to wait until they have the supplies to be able to keep pushing and keep pushing. They don't know where the Germans are, and the Germans actually are in pretty good shape supply-wise, especially after they get their additional 30. So probably best to just stand around and hold out. We'll see. All right, well, we open up in June, and the Germans started things off. Remember, they had bombarded the fortifications out of this hex. French put some reinforcements in, but it still wasn't very much. It was only 8 strength points. The Germans attacked extra couple 8-point divisions in there and got enough force in there, 70-something points, some 13 supply points because of all the artillery they've thrown into it. They managed to roll moderately okay. I think 4. They're at -3 on this table. But the result ended up doing 7 of the 8 strength points. The 8th strength point in this would have fallen. They would have gotten the hacks, and it would have kind of opened up a breach in the line in a way that the French would have to react to and might end up causing some problems. Just in terms of shifting stuff over, it might open up an opportunity. In general, though, it probably wasn't a very valuable attack. The French spent 2 supply, the Germans spent 13. I'm not sure the Germans would have had enough to really exploit the attack because they had been kind of pushed heavily on their supply by the French attack, by the French offensive. We also got one of those, I think I pointed this out already, but one of those annoying factors in the reinforcement chart. These 4-5 units are reduced units. The numbering is correct on them, but this is why you will never know what you have if you stop using the numbering, because there are 4-5 units, right? There are units that, maybe not, but there are many ways to get a 4-5. I don't know. Anyway, those aren't listed as 4-5s. They're listed as 3-5s. I've put a strength reduction marker because I think that's what really is intended. What little gain you get out of actual units on the board that have to be pulled out and changed and filled out, etc., I think is so limited compared to, I don't know. You know, I wouldn't want to step back and not have the units, but the mechanism for delivering which pieces come in at what time is just too painful, way too painful. And if you've got units that they're just going to indicate the strength point of as the unit, they're going to say it's a 3-5 when there is no unit in the counter mix that has that 3-5 rating on it, neither reduced nor otherwise that I could find. But there are some units that on their reduced side are close to 3-5s. Well, what do you do? Do you put the reduction markers? Do you not? I don't know. Before I did it, leaving the unit without the reduction marker, then I started putting the reduction markers when I hit the mountain unit. That was an 8-5, and that was probably wise because there's probably a mountain unit somewhere that I couldn't find that actually fit that value. Although I think there was a 7.5 to tell you the truth, and there's no +1 strength markers. So either this needs to be really revamped in terms of, first of all, it needs to be revamped in terms of getting, making it more usable. But it also the order of entry, but it also probably has actual just errors in it, from what I can see. Whether or not errors, where there are special conditions like this is a weakened unit, that should be noted if that's what's intended. Asterisk, whatever. It doesn't have to take up a lot of room here. There aren't a lot of these units, but it's a real annoyance because I don't know if I'm putting the right stuff down, the intended stuff. It doesn't matter that much. But if it doesn't matter that much, I might as well just fudge it, and, right? It matters about as much as actually having the units on the board and having to pull them out and cycle them, or else take the losses and build new units and put them in place, etc. It's just the whole thing, all the details that make this not just a pure strength point game add very little, but they do add something. But I don't feel like they make up for the additional pain that this chart perhaps provides and the uncertainty that it leaves you with. Because if you are fudging those, if you don't know, was that supposed to be 4/5s? Was it supposed to be full strength? Or am I supposed to have the strength point marker? Not knowing means I'm going to err a certain amount of the time, probably. Had to be explained in the entry order. And I don't know. I'm just really not sure how much I want to keep going with this, but okay. The French too try opening up a different front. They moved an assault over here. Now that they have supplies, they saw what looked like kind of a weak point. It's going to be a lower drain on supplies to fight on only a 2 hex to the 1 hex front. Of course, the only reason it was attractive is the Germans didn't have it terribly well defended. The reason, some of it's the terrain. It's plain terrain. That was some of the advantage. No minus plus swap there. But some of it was also, hey, the French attacks have been here. We stripped some troops away from everything else. But it happened to be a weak spot in the terrain that was weakened. So it seemed like a good option. But the Germans can just flood that back in. Over here, the French aren't terribly better off than they were. They're up to 9 strength points there. That's the best they could manage. They've got more coming next turn. But the Germans may want to launch another round of attack, which they weren't planning on doing. But they're not seeing the significant numbers of French that they hoped to see, or that they were expecting to see in this area. They're not seeing a flood of troops moving over either. So the possibility of a breakthrough is still there. If they take that, they may be able to push into, well, no, that's a fortress. Yeah, there isn't much possibility of that. They'll be able to roll this hex then and have, equally strong positioning against it. But there's not really any great hole that's going to open up if they take that hex. It could give a significant strength against this hex, but there's the river line there, a lot of terrain. It's just not worth doing there. And after those couple little assaults on the first turn of June, we've reverted back to build up and try to prepare for the assault whenever it's going to come. I think I've spent enough that I may actually have been able to put off another month's for the offensive, but certainly a turn off one of the months is going to be put aside where it doesn't have to be done. I just don't know what to say there. As I did the German turn, it's just coming to mind the logistical aspect of balancing all the points, making sure the line's weak points are covered in light of all these withdrawals. And I mean, okay, so I'm not doing the required, the numerical unit withdrawal, which would be even worse. But I pick a unit out, and then I have to try to figure out how to shift my line around to make up for that little change. It's a level of annoyance. Now, one of my favorite games has something similar to this, Desert Fox, where you have to constantly keep your supplies. You have to keep counting up your troops and see if you have your supplies network set up so that it can feed the troops. Much, much more complex and annoying type of system than, say, the OCS has. But it is the glimmer to where the OCS is going with its supply rules. For that, I really find the game impressive. The supply rules are a step in the right direction, even if they were very, very complex in terms of the mechanical actions you have to take. Here, I don't feel like I'm gaining a lot by all this swapping troops in and out and everything. Yes, it historically happened, but it just, I kind of want to just say, okay, I'm sending my replacement points that way instead of to the west. The problem is the only thing that this is meant to represent to me is either getting the exact historical designations of the units that were in specific locations correct, or that fiddling is a key part of the game. That's part of this experience. That's what you want. And if it's the latter, well, it's not what I want. I don't like having to balance my forces in that sort of way. And I don't think that it's all that terribly realistic. But that's really what distinguishes this from a strength point, from a pure strength point game, is that you have to do this swapping in and out and trying to balance things. And, sometimes I'm making tactically bad decisions in an area just because I don't want more counters on the board. I don't want more headache developing in the future. So I take, some tactical risk to avoid that. Is that reasonable or not? I don't know. But it's certainly not the decision that I want to be making is, do I want to be burning my calculation abilities, limited as they are, on these tasks, or do I want to be, concentrating on something else? And for me, concentrating on something else is more important. So I just throw them into a headquarters and let them rot there for a couple turns as I try to figure out how to get them up to date. And I guess maybe that's the skill in this game, is managing that number crunching and constant counting all the time. I guess that's where maybe it appeals. I'm not sure. I've never liked that side of wargaming. After the German attack in this sector a while back, the French have decided to position a significant amount of forces. Now, this is obvious. They telegraph their move every time they do it because they don't have the ability to rail right in there. Anyway, there's a weak spot kind of here. Not terribly weak, and then the possibility of crossing the river where there's absolutely no troops, or maybe breaching here, just some kind of forcing the Germans back in a front that they're not expecting an attack. And there's not a lot of value to any of this. I mean, it really doesn't make a difference. It's worse terrain to fight over, so if this starts to form into a breakthrough, it's not going to be as deep as what could have happened here. But what could have happened there isn't happening. So, the French are once again looking to see if they can divert another direction. One thing to note, it takes me a long time to get these turns played, but it's not that I'm playing a significantly large amount. The game itself actually at this point is moving very quickly. I'd say turns are taking, maybe a player turn takes maybe 10 minutes at most. So it's not this humongous burden here. It's just, there's not enough excitement. There's not enough things of interest to me going on to keep fueling my flavor. It could be a lot more detailed. I'd probably have given up if it was, but it's very hard for me to face something of this size that isn't really sparking much for me. So as I was saying, it doesn't take a lot of time to play the turns out until you have to withdraw a unit. And let's just take a look. We were talking about, takes 5-10 minutes to play a player turn, right? All right. Well, looking for June's withdrawal. I'm not even done with it yet. 224 infantry brigades, 1 colonial, 2 colonial. Great. So I know they're going to look like this. They're going to have this kind of brown thing. Well, here was one of them. He was sitting right in the dead pile. Easy to see a 2-4. Great. I glanced at the others. Ah, there's a 3-4 grow. Okay, well, whatever. Pretty sure that's not it. I went through every goddamn counter on the map. Every French counter. Twice, essentially. Before I went back to look, oh yeah, this one's not a 2-4, but it is on the back side. So you're expected to withdraw 2 strength points of that. This is the kind of crap, I mean, when you spend half your time playing in trying to find a piece or trying to shift things, the majority of the effort in this game is spent on such piddly little stuff. Again, maybe it works fine on Vassal. Anyway, what happens is these 2 units are going to be withdrawn, and I have to withdraw 4 replacement points. And you know what the net effect is? 4 strength points are gone from the map. That's it. We're keeping track of all the strength points on all the units, and it's just this mindless, pointless exercise. And continuing on my withdrawals, I managed, I'm getting very frustrated here, to pull these 4-4s off. Then I thought I screwed up trying to read this, and fine. I mean, this is me being frustrated here. I thought I was withdrawing from some other era instead. Anyway, that's fine. But then looking for a 3-4, a natural 3-4 that's actually on the map. And I don't think, there's a whole pile of dead ones over here. And if I couldn't find one, it would come up here. But I have to remove one of the ones. And here, it means I have to remove from the Paris front, which I really did not want to do. And there's no way I would be withdrawn. So what does that mean? Well, that means I'm going to have to shift all kinds of troops or just say the hell with it. And again, I spent a good 15 minutes looking for a 3-4 under all the counters. Yeah. If there was an electronic coverage of this, if this was played on Vassal or whatever, and it is, it's available that way, it might be a perfectly fine game. And I've said this several times. But man, I don't know if anybody plays this in more than, I don't know. Playing the Schlieffen plan wasn't so bad. There was a lot going on. But here, there's nothing going on except that I'm piddling with these pieces all the time. I'm just constantly shifting them to no real end. It's just this, attempt to smooth the fronts out and make sure that I don't give too much of an advantage. And it's just this humongous headache. And we close out June. Nothing else happened. Just building up of forces. Basically, the French have quite a big army at this point. But, and the Germans have been filtering troops out, but they've also been getting things in, so not much has been moving there. Of course, the French have been pulling things out as they're putting things in too, just to make the more work for everyone. I counted up my French points. It looks like I have 1 point too many to go 2 months, which means, well, the French will attack perhaps on the last turn of July. Whether or not there's British help, I haven't decided yet. But I'm setting it up so that I've got a potential attack here or up here. I've got big enough armies that, I can put a lot of strength in a lot of different places. Now, of course, the French units are limited to 6s, but I've also got the artillery that I'm positioning to be able to give me that added oomph. The hope is that, well, one of these places I'll be able to break, or maybe I'll be able to shift it and make an attack on this German unit or something along those lines. There's a lot of flexibility towards doing any of these attacks. And if I can breach the line in one place, that's enough to kind of push forward and maybe force things back. This hex is still being ignored. Both sides have fortifications on the other side. So the trenches aren't really absolutely necessary, and pushing forward might mean losing some units for moving into that hex. It just doesn't seem worth it if you're not going to launch an attack to do so. Anyway, up this goes, and I'll set up the next month.